So let's say you go to the grocery store, but you want to make a cider. Well, here's one way to do it.
All right, to start off, we went to the grocery store and we purchased 2 of each apple. And then we realized that that was way too many apples. So we're going to use 1 of each apple. And the apples that we had available to us were a Honey Crisp, a Granny Smith, a Gala Honey Bear, a Fuji, a plain old Gala, an Ambrosia Gold, and one that it's sticker, because we got all the stickers here.
It's like chippy peas or something.
Yeah,
we
can't decipher that one.
So there's one that we don't know what the heck it is, but you know what, honestly, this is the Red Delicious.
Yep.
This is the Granny Smith.
Yep.
That's about the extent of what I know what they are. But it doesn't matter. Why did we use so many different kinds of apples?
We used so many different apples because we know from experience in making applesauce that if you use a combination of different apple types, then you're going to get a more complex flavor. And so we wanted to use that applesauce knowledge for our cider.
But also in apple cider, it's commonly known that the more types of apples you have, the more complex the flavors. Because some of them are tart, some of them are sweet, they have different levels of malic acid, all that sort of thing. So they're all good.
Which is a different way of saying what I just said.
Yeah.
Which is
that's what we do.
It's how we talk.
So I'm going to process these apples. And by process, I mean I'm cutting them in half and I'm going to cut that core out. So I'm going to cut it in a quarter and then literally just cut straight across because the seeds, it's a misnomer that people think the seeds contain cyanide. They actually don't contain cyanide. They contain a compound that can turn to cyanide in the human stomach. So it's kind of important to not have them in there. However, even if they were in the brew, they get removed before we actually consume it. So probably not a problem, but you know what? Better safe than sorry.
And this is a common situation in many fruits, but it's more pronounced in apples.
Yes, pears have it too. The seeds just tend to be not nearly as numerous or large.
And it's also not as pronounced.
Not as much.
Because we did the research.
Yup. So I am just going to cut these up and see when I'm done. Okay, so it was an all-day affair, but I cut up those like 7 apples.
They're in this pot.
They're in this pot. And now what I'm going to do is take some apple juice that we also got at the store. This is liquid organic pure apple. And here's what I like about this. Here's the ingredient list. Let me read this to you. Are you ready? Are you sitting down? Are you prepared? Ingredient. Notice it doesn't say ingredients. It says ingredient, : organic apple juice.
Yay!
I will be the first to say that this is not an inexpensive apple juice. It's like $6 to $7 a quart, okay? So this is not a cheap cider. I just have to be honest with you. It's not going to be super inexpensive, but it's not going to be crazy expensive either.
The reason why we're so excited about that ingredient list is because we in the past have had some issues with apple juices that have been treated with
ascorbic acid, vitamin C, those things. They've made an odd flavor in the end product. So we try to avoid that if possible. This was the only one that didn't have it. Kirkland apple juice, if you can get it at Costco, by far the best apple juice we've used. This would be like right up there with it, but it's a lot less expensive. So if you can get Kirkland apple juice, use that. And Costco is still a grocery store, so it still fits the bill. Anyway, what I want to do now is just put enough apple juice in here to pretty much cover the apples.
And if you notice, Brian was shaking the juice up a little bit because lots of times some of the particulates settle to the bottom, just like you've noticed when you're fermenting, right? We will want those particulates in our original must because that will help, perhaps, with our fermentation.
You thought I was going to throw it. You want the goop, is what she's saying. You want the goop. I mean, it's not much, but, you know, every little bit helps. You paid for that goop. You want to get the goop.
So I'm sitting on the very edge of my chair right now because Thor has occupied the rest of my chair.
Thor is one of our cats.
Is one of our cats.
It's important to tell you that.
Yes.
Because otherwise, Thor, really? The god Thor?
Yes.
Our Thor is the god of slumber. Pretty much what he does all the time.
And that's what he's doing.
He's Garfield. Literally Garfield, minus the lasagna. Though if we had a pan sitting on the floor, I'm pretty sure he would lay in it. So let me just show you. I have this mostly covering the apples. Let me show you. So the apples are mostly covered by apple juice, a little bit sticking out. What I want to do though is I put the apple juice in there just to help them heat up a little bit quicker. Because what we're going to do, we didn't freeze these apples, so there's been no processing to them at all. And you know, little Johnny walking around in there, he might have sneezed on these things. He might have touched them. He might have rubbed them on his butt. Who knows? So I almost got it out without laughing. Anyway, so there's also microbes and all sorts of things on these apples that we want to get rid of. Now, I would like to say again, just in case we didn't say it earlier, these were scrubbed. So any wax, anything that was on the outside were scrubbed and washed off. That's very important. You want to do that when you're keeping the skins. Why are we keeping the skins on?
Because skins contain tannins, and tannins is something that we want to add to our brew. We're going to accentuate that with something else later, but we still want the natural tannins of the apples to be in our brew.
They also add a little bit of extra flavor. Not a lot, but it's mostly for tannins. So what I'm going to do now is put this on the stove, bring it to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not boiling it, okay? You can, but you're going to get more of a cooked flavor. I'm not going for the cooked flavor. I just want to pasteurize these. So 160 degrees, as soon as they hit 160 degrees center of an apple piece, I'm going to use a probe thermometer, then take off the heat, let it cool. I'm probably going to end up filling our sink with water and letting this cool down to below 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we'll be back to show you next. Okay, so the apples and the apple juice were cooked, 160 degrees. It was probably there for like 10 minutes, and then I ended up stirring it, and I put it in. I didn't dump the whole thing. I just put the pot into a sink of water until it cooled down to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. By the way, this paddle, spoon, and everything else that we're going to use has been sanitized in
The red button.
Sanitization is very, very important, especially when you're working with a lower ABV brew like a cider, because it's much easier for an infection to get in. Once you get into like the mid-teens for alcohol, it's a lot harder. But this...
If your hands are going to come in contact with anything of your brew, sanitize your hands.
Yeah, ours are in and out of sanitizer fluid the whole time. Like, you don't see it. We make cuts because it's not really all that interesting to watch me get up out of my chair and walk over there and dunk my hands and come back. So we cut that stuff out.
Yeah.
But we do it. Anyway, we have apples and juice right now, and it's about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and what I'm going to do is put in the rest of our juice. You know what? I'm going to wait.
Do you want the fermented?
We may have spatial limitation.
Yes, and we found this out from another beverage that we used using a similar method, that space, it is the final frontier.
Yep. So let's have a little Big Mouth bubbler, please. Okay, we are going to be using a little Big Mouth bubbler that we got from Northern Brewer. We'll have a link to this in the description. If you don't have one of these, or you haven't purchased one yet, or you're not sure if this is what you want to do, a bucket will work. Just make sure it's food safe and make sure you clean it out real good. And we use Star San as our sanitizer. That's the joke about the whole thing with, turbos. It is literally just Star San, which is a sanitizer, link in the description, mixed to the manufacturer's suggestion that we use to clean things with. If you do not...
It's diluted in water because it's an acid-based sanitization liquid. So if you do full strength, you're going to basically corrode everything that's corrodable.
If you don't have that or don't want to buy that yet, or you're just starting out, you can use baby bottle sanitizer, which also, it's basically the same idea. It works really well. Follow the directions on the package. Or my least favorite, because it's a little bit dangerous, is you can heat water to like 160 degrees and dip things in it for like a minute or so. Just be careful with plastics. It can still melt at 160 degrees, but for your glass and metals, it's perfectly fine. Depending
on how you work with your glass, though, you still do risk the thermal shock. So you want to make sure that you don't go to extremes of temperature.
So what I want to do now is get all these apples out of here and into here. And you know, the manual method just works better than most because I don't want to splash it everywhere. We're going to put it a little closer. The apples did soften a little bit. Again, I checked the apples themselves, not the juice, because the juice will heat up a lot faster. So I checked that the apples were 160 degrees in the center using a probe thermometer. And then I just cut the heat, let it sit for a few minutes, and then I started cooling it. So that way everything's nice and pasteurized. That's a lot of apples. But we also have half of our juice in here as well. So that'll fill in a lot of those gaps. I'm going to get every last piece of apple out.
I don't know why.
Because OCD is a thing. All right, now I'm just going to, without splashing this everywhere, I'm going to dump this in. Now this happens to be a 1.4 gallon rated fermenter. It actually holds about 1.5 gallons. I only want to fill it to about there though, so I got to be careful with the rest of the ingredients. The first thing I want to add in though is something for, let me get this out of the way. One of the first things that I want to add though is actually an alteration to mouthfeel and kind of texture of the cider. Ciders tend to be, I like them a little sweet, but I like them to have a little body to them. Otherwise they feel kind of watery. So what we did is we took 1 tea bag of black tea and a cup of water. The amount of water isn't important because you're going to be mixing into this, but I like to use as little as possible so that we don't dilute the juice as much. And we steeped it for 5 minutes.
Right, the steeping time is actually more important than how much water you steep it in, because you want it to be strong enough, but you don't want it to be too strong that it overbitters your brew.
Now, what you want to understand about this is this does not add tea flavor to the brew. It adds tannins, which if you're familiar with like black coffee, black tea, that mouth puckering feel, that's tannins, okay? It's in wines and things like that. It helps to make it feel more rich and full in your mouth.
That said, if you use anything other than a plain black tea, you are going to be adding flavor.
Yes.
So that's why when we're doing a tannin replacement, we suggest just straight black tea. However,
the brand does not matter.
However, if you want to add a flavor, then that's up to you. It'll be just different than what we're doing right now.
Right. You know why we're talking about that so much? Because every single time we say black tea, somebody says, can I add Earl Grey? Can I use this? Can I use that? A lot of herbal teas don't even have tea in them. So just keep that in mind too. The idea is the tannins. So black tea, just use black tea. Use black tea. Just use black tea. How about we just use black tea? Okay, on to the rest of the apple juice. I'm going to put in the last 2. I shook it up to get the goop. Looks like we're going to be able to use the full gallon on this.
I think it's going to work.
Yeah, I think we properly volumized the volume this time. If you haven't seen it yet, we have a video coming out. I think this will probably be out before it, for a pumpkinless spiced wine.
Yep.
And well, it was full to like here. It was a little much. We got greedy on that one. This is perfect. Oh, look at that.
Bellissimo.
It's like right to where I wanted it to be. That's so awesome. Now, you might be asking, why does that even matter? Well, here's the thing. If I fill this more, as fermentation happens, it expands and it makes foam and it pushes stuff up and it makes a mess and it gets everywhere and it's not fun. And you lose some product in the process too. So you definitely don't want to do that if you can avoid it. May I have the paddle back, please? So
yes,
that I can
you may.
mix this. Okay, so I have a paddle. I just want to mix that together because I did just add in some juice. So we want to make sure that everything is nice and homogeneous.
The reason being, we're about to take our gravity reading, and so we want to make sure that all the sugars that are available in the brew right now are equally distributed. Now we know that we haven't had enough time, even with the cooking of the apples, for all of the sugars of the apples to be released into our beverage. So this is a guesstimate. Just like every time we do a measurement and a ABV reading, it is always, always, always a guesstimate. Why? Because we're not a lab. That's why.
I am going to give another estimate though. I'm going to figure out roughly how much sugar is in an apple. Apple, fresh, with skin. One, we'll call them large. Large.
Large.
That will have a grand total of 23 grams of sugar. So we have roughly 230 grams. So about half a pound of sugars will be added from the fruit. Now here's the thing. This is going to be some amount of estimation because will the yeast get all the sugars out of that fruit? We have no way of knowing. There's no way without sending this to a lab to know that. But I know that because, a little bit of numbers for you, half a pound of sugar equals about 0.023 points of gravity, which I'm going to add here. That's about what we're going to add to our original gravity, and that's what we're going to work from, okay? So, let me take a reading. If none of that made sense, it will in just a minute. Right now, I'm taking a gravity reading of the juice, essentially, because none of the sugars really came out of the apples. I know that from the last time we did this, it didn't really change at all. So I'm just going to grab the reading of the juice. They're usually about 1.050 to 1.060, somewhere in that range. So that's what I'm expecting.
Also have a slight temperature differential going on because this is still slightly warm.
Yeah.
And our
could affect it by a couple
is rated to,
points.
what is it, 60 degrees?
Yeah, it could affect it by a couple of points. It really doesn't change that much. So everything's just an estimate, just to get an idea. The ending gravity is actually the really important one. And this is sitting at 1.050 on the nose. So we're going to say 1.050 plus 0.023 from the apples.
0.023.
Yep. So that gives us roughly a 1.073 original gravity, which, for those of you curious, could potentially be an approximate of about 9.5% or so, give or take. So it'll be somewhere between, say, 9 and 10%. I'm cool with that. It's a little high for a cider, to be honest, but it's okay because I don't really think it gets all the sugars out of the apples anyway. So it's probably going to be somewhere between 7 and 8% realistically. Okay, there's only one thing left to do now. That is to add some bread yeast. We do have packets of bread yeast lying around, but Fleischmann's, you can buy this exact jar at the store. It's probably the cheapest way to buy it, but you can get an individual packet if you prefer.
And this is the Fleischmann's Active Dry.
Yes. And I'm just going to take a teaspoon of this, which is about what they have in the packet, and I'm going to just freely disperse it into the must. This is a must, by the way. Not with a K. It's not musk. That's a smelly perfume. This is must.
Or an animal product.
It's always an animal product.
Yes, I know, but
musk is kind of strong.
Yeah.
It's smelly stuff. I mean, this has smell too, but it's not the same.
No.
All that's left to do now is to put a lid on it. Derek has been taking notes diligently as we went because I suck at it. We get done and I go, I didn't even write down what yeast we used. I didn't write down what I did. All kinds of stuff.
So I have all the different types of apples that we have in here. I have the 1 gallon of apple juice. I have the 1 teaspoon of bread yeast. I have the black tea, how much we used, how long it was steeped. And I have additions for later on that'll come later in this video, but much later for us in real life. And I have the original gravity.
Now, at this point, we are going to set this on a tray with lips like a cookie sheet so that if it happens to overflow, we don't have to worry about it because it's not going to just spill everywhere. The little big mouth bubbler is a little more hard for that to happen because it has to get up through the airlock, flow over. There's a reservoir right here, and then it has to overflow that. So it takes quite a bit. Like, you got to be pretty neglectful for it to happen, or it has to be a very, very aggressive ferment, which this is possible to happen. For those of you who are going to ask, can I use another yeast other than bread yeast? Yes, of course you can. We use bread yeast because, well, it's a perfectly viable yeast for making ciders and beers and things like that, and even low ABV wines.
This is a grocery store cider.
That's right. I have yet to see wine yeast for sale in my grocery store, so that's why we use bread yeast. But don't think it's inferior by nature because it actually works really, really well. We used it for many years for all of our fermentations. Then, the things to look for. You will see bubbles coming up the side. You may see some foam. You may even see some brownish, like crusty looking foam on the sides of the bottle. All these things are perfectly normal.
The foam may push up into the base of your airlock. It may push all the way out of your airlock. If it does that and continues to make a big giant mess, you're going to want to switch this out to a blow-off tube. We have a video on blow-off tubes that I will link in the description below, so that way you will know our blow-off tube procedure. It's really easy.
It's a piece of silicone tubing run into a mason jar. That's it. I usually use that for like the first day or two if it starts to do that, but that's something you want to be concerned with. When do you move to the next step, which is the next part of this video, but when do you do that? Do you see this airlock? When that stops bubbling, like literally just, it's not even moving at all. It's time to move to the next step, and we'll show you that in about 2 seconds. All right, it's been 9 days, and honestly, we probably could have done this sooner. If you look at that airlock, it's not really moving. It did just do it because I'm pushing on the lid, but it really stopped pretty quickly. It was like 5 days or so. We do only have like a 1.050 gravity plus the apples, which were like maybe 23 points. So we have something like a 1.060-ish original gravity. And looking inside, It smells like a cider. It smells like a cider's supposed to smell. It looks fine. I have been pushing the fruits down. Let me show you what it looks like inside. So as you can see, the fruit is sitting on top. Now, I did not push it down today because I knew we were going to be taking a reading on this today, and I knew I'd have it open and I'd be able to push it down anyway. But everything about it looks like perfect. That's what it should pretty much look like. You don't see any mold. There's nothing growing. There isn't an eyeball staring up at you from inside there. That's all important stuff to know. But today, we want to take a reading. We want to make sure that it's actually done, make sure it didn't stall or do anything stupid. That's right. Nothing stupid. So I'm going to just get way past all that fruit because there's a lot of fruit in there. But all that fruit adds complexity to this. This is just a basic grocery store cider made with grocery store ingredients. So we wanted it to be as complex and complete as possible.
It looks like it did its thing.
Yeah, I think it worked. I'm going to call that at 0.996. It might even be 0.995. Let's go with 0.996 just to be on the safe side. Did you take my pen?
I stole your pen. I'm so sorry.
Pilot G2, best pen ever. Links in the description. Does not come with a little flag. You got to make that yourself. Now, just to do our due diligence here, let me calculate the ABV of this. Just remember, anytime you calculate an ABV, it's always an approximation. You can be within a point or so. That's about the best you can really hope for. No matter how accurate you think you're being with all your measurement, there's a lot of factors. And I'm saying this because a lot of people have been giving me like, oh, I got a 6.977 ABV. I'm like, I'm going to doubt you got that. 3 digits. No, this only reads 2 digits. So I usually go with no digits past the point and just go with whole numbers or half numbers. It's all good. But anyway, so we started with 1.050. Our fruit, 0.023. Now, we don't know how much of those sugars got consumed. So I could go with the 1.050 or I could go with 1.073, which would be with the fruit added. I like to go somewhere in the middle. So we're just going to take, let's add 12 points, which would be roughly half of the 0.023. So plus 0.012 gives us 1.062 original gravity instead of our 1.050. Let me explain that another way. Because we don't actually know how much sugar came out of those fruits and how much got consumed, I'm just going to count it as half. So I counted it as if it was half the amount of sugar got consumed by the yeast, okay? So our absolute was the juice, which was 1.050 plus half of the fruit gives us 1.062. Make more sense now? Okay, and then we ended at 0.996. Minus 0.996 gives us 0.066. Now, I normally use a 135 coefficient, but because this is a lower gravity, I'm actually going to use the 131.25 times 131.25 gives us 8.66%. Now, I know we're going to use 42 grams of sugar to carbonate this, which is going to give us about 0.4% alcohol. So, you know what? I'm pretty confident in calling this 9%. What does that mean? It means it could be anywhere from like 7.7 to about 10.
It
Somewhere
just
in
doesn't
that range.
matter.
But for a grocery store cider, 9% is pretty good. That's practically
Too
wine.
shabby.
That's practically wine territory.
All right. So at this point, obviously, we need to rack. And by rack, I mean we need to remove our usable alcoholic
Cider.
liquid
Cider.
from all the junk that is in here. So we want to leave behind the fruit solids and we want to leave behind as much of the lees, that is all the sediment that came out on the bottom, behind. So we just have our cider left.
Good to the last drop. Okay. And I poured that into there instead of into here. That way I didn't disturb any of that lees and all that kind of thing. So hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer. Now, let's start the racking process.
Let's.
It's very simple. Your source should be higher than your destination, okay? This is an auto siphon. Please use an auto siphon. They're like 20 bucks or 15 bucks, something like that. But it makes this process so much easier. And I'm going to leave the cap on because that way I can get down into that lees cake just a little bit. Do need to push past some of the fruit, which is breaking up on me, but I'm doing the best I can. About half to 3/4 of the way down, and I start the siphoning process.
If you angle your auto siphon to you so you can see it through the glass, it's
bottom.
really going to help you figure out where you are as far as past the fruit.
Yes. And what I do is I just move it down as it goes, because the further I get down towards that Lee's cake, the more it's going to suck up into it. And here's the thing, and I was going to talk about this. This is only going to get racked the one time. And here's why. We've seen with carbonation that the sooner you can rack and get it into a bottle primed for carbonation, the better, because there's still some active yeast in here, okay? They've just gone dormant because there's no more sugars. But as soon as we give them some, they're going to wake right up, I hope, and carbonate this.
The reason being is that carbonation is a mini controlled fermentation.
Exactly.
So without any yeast still alive, there's not going to be any carbonation.
Right. We've left things too long in the past, so the yeast just really go dormant and they fall out of suspension. So there's really nothing left in the cider or in the brew to carbonate, and that is another issue. So letting them fall out and go dormant is bad, as well as doing it, well, that's the same problem, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. But what I'm talking about is the faster you can get it into that bottle and primed for carbonation, the better. That's the gist.
We need some yeast.
Essentially, normally we would let this sit to clear more before we bottled. But because we want to carbonate it, we're going to bottle it a little sooner. So there might be some more sediment in the bottom of these bottles than usual, but it should still carbonate, and it'll probably clear out in the bottle. Okay, so now we have our cloudy cider. I was told by someone from the UK that cider is supposed to be cloudy. They couldn't understand why we were talking about cleared cider. They were like, it's supposed to be cloudy. Okay, I'll go with that. Let's call it that. So we have our cider. Now we want to do a quick taste of it. I'm going to bet it's going to taste a little dry and probably harsh because it's very young and it's unsweetened and went dry. Smells like cider. That's not bad. I think just a little bit of sweetening and this might be really, really good. The different apples mixed in with the juices really did make a huge difference. I'm even getting a little bit of body from the tannins. Yeah. I'm really happy with this so far. But if we put sugar or honey or brown sugar or any fermentable into this, we really couldn't pasteurize it we couldn't pasteurize it because then we can't carbonate it. So that would defeat that purpose. So there's like the holy grail is a sweet carbonated beverage. Now, using natural carbonation, that's difficult to do with fermentable sugars. Since we don't want to keg carb this one, we're actually going to use a non-fermentable sugar. And we're going to be using erythritol. And why erythritol over allulose? Because I found it first when I opened the drawer. And because people in the UK can get it. Allulose apparently is not available there. So
we confirmed that they can get erythritol?
They can get erythritol, okay. Someone told me.
Okay.
So how much am I putting in? Enough. That's the easiest way to explain it. I don't have a lot here, so I don't think this needs a lot. The way I do it is I put some in, we stir it up, we taste it, see if it's enough, and go from there. That way, we never over-sweeten by accident because we didn't just blindly pour in a certain amount. Instead, we put in a controlled amount. Now, the starting number is always the most difficult part. How much do you put in to start with? I put in like a quarter cup, maybe? Really not that much. Half a cup at most, which is probably, I don't know, quarter pound, a few ounces. So not very much. And that comes with experience. You're better to err on the side of less rather than more, because if you put in too much, there's nothing you can do. You have to dilute, or it's just going to be uber sweet, or make it a mixer. That's what a lot of people do. All right, so I think I don't hear any granules in there. That's one nice thing about erythritol and allulose both is they dissolve very, very quickly in the liquids. So let's take a taste on this. I think I'll just use the rest of the bag. There's not a lot. There's a few tablespoons left. Yeah, there's not a lot in here. It's good, but I think I'd like it just a touch sweeter. I'm just going to dump in the rest. Oh, so carefully.
We're thwacking our packet.
All right, it's in there. You can make this as sweet as you like or as dry as you like. I know some people really like dry ciders. Other people prefer really sweet ciders. My thing is, if you add sweetness to it, it does add to the body, and it also brings out flavors. Like the first time we tasted this, it tasted fine. The second time, I tasted much more fresh apple. Much, much more fresh apple came through. So I'm hoping the addition of that little bit more sugar gives it even a little bit more fresh apple. I mean, it's apple cider, right? You know, it's supposed to taste like apples.
Now, if you happen to be in a household where different people have different sweetness preferences, you can always err on the dry side and add sweetness later. However, because we intend this to be a carbonated beverage, you don't want to add sugar or anything granular to a carbonated beverage, as that's going to create nucleation sites, so it's going to let all that gas escape from your beverage and immediately flatten your beverage. So, if you know you want to sweeten a carbonated beverage, if you make a simple syrup and make sure that all the sugar granulars
sugar and water mixed together
are dissolved thoroughly, add that to your glass first, then pour your carbonated beverage on top of that, you should be able to sweeten your beverage without losing your carbonation.
That is a way that you can use real sugar, by the way, with this cider. You could actually just pour it in a glass and sweeten by the glass.
Yeah, I think that's lovely.
I think that's really nice. This is going to be actually pretty amazing. Okay, so I'm going to use the answer to the universe, 42 grams of white sugar. Now you can use carbonation drops, which are just sugar. You can use, there's various types of sugar you can use. White, plain, table sugar works just fine. Don't use confectioners because that has cornstarch in it. So I'm just going to measure out 42 grams of white table sugar and I'll be right back. Okay, before we add the sugar, Derek just reminded me we need to take a gravity reading because this is the important bit. We add a certain amount of sweetness until it gets to our tastes, but you don't know if you could repeat that and do it exactly the way we did until we give you a gravity reading. And this is very important because what if you only had half a gallon or you had 2 gallons or you had a gallon and a half or 1 gallon and 4 ounces? Adding the exact same amount of sugar or erythritol that we added really is useless because now you have a different concentration. So using the gravity method, the specific gravity method, you can add until you reach the same specific gravity that we had and know with confidence that you have the same exact thing that we do.
If you so choose.
Yes, because that's the beautiful thing about these non-fermentable sugars is they do actually read gravity. In this case, I didn't do a guess ahead of time. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
We went to 1.010. All right, so we added just enough to get it to 1.010. Pretty respectable. It's considered semi-sweet for a cider. So that falls pretty much right in the range. And I think the better quality fruits and juices that you put into a cider, the less sweetness you really need. That's my opinion. Now, 42 grams of sugar. I measured it out. It is exactly 42 grams. I'm going to take some of our must, actually some of our cider, this isn't must anymore, and put it into this container. Both of these things were cleaned, sanitized, all that, and I want to mix it up. Because the other way of putting just a little bit into each bottle, okay, some people swear by it. My thing is this. Every bottle size requires a little bit different amount. So if you use a 12-ounce bottle or a 16-ounce bottle or a regular size wine bottle, you need different amounts. And that means you have to figure that out. I'm good at math, but I don't really feel like calculating it out for different size bottles. So this way, the amount of sugar is spread through the entire batch evenly, and there's no worries about one having too much or too little. And second, most time you can't measure out a teaspoon exactly. And if you go through the trouble of using a scale like I did to measure out the 42 grams of sugar, and you do that for each bottle, why not just do it in the whole thing anyway? It's just easier.
Now, if you're confused of why we added erythritol and why are we adding a fermentable sugar such as table sugar now, there's different purposes for each of those ingredients. The erythritol we added to get it to the desired sweetness level for our taste. The 42 grams of fermentable sugar that we're adding now is simply for carbonation.
Yes. Many people are confused on this. Carbonation is a small fermentation, okay? It really is. It does produce a little bit of alcohol, which we calculated earlier, about 0.4%, and gas. The gas gets trapped in there and causes it to be fizzy, bubbly, carbonated. The alcohol actually is there too. So if you put too much sugar in, you could create too much pressure, too much gas, and cause the bottles to explode. And that is something we are trying to avoid. But we also want carbonation. There are calculators online. If you know how much actual carbonation you want, you can figure it out. We were using 28 grams because it was right smack in the middle of the highest and the lowest. And we've since gone up because a couple of people have told us that that's not very much carbonation, and I'd have to agree. That 42 grams, because it's the perfect number, also seems to work really well. It also turns out to be exactly 1.5 ounces. So that way, you know, all of the people that don't use metric can still measure it out to 1.5 ounces. And if you're wondering why I put some of the must into the Pyrex container to mix it up, it's that way I don't have to mix the whole thing. And what if I miss some or whatever? This way I can make sure it's mixed in. Some people will do this and they'll microwave it or heat it up. You can also do it with just plain water if you wanted to. You do dilute the product just a little bit if you do that, but there's nothing wrong with it per se. It would make it a little bit faster, but I tend to talk a lot, and this gives me an opportunity to talk to you guys while I'm mixing it up. And I'm checking underneath just to see, like I let it sit for a second to see if any granules hit the bottom. Nothing. This is mixed beautifully. So now I'm just going to carefully pour it in, just give that a bit of a mix through. All right, the next step is we're going to put this into bottles. We have a whole bunch of 16-ounce bottles, and we have a whole video on bottling. And because this video is already getting pretty long, we're going to spare you that detail. But if you want to see how to bottle, it's just racking that goes into a bottle. We have a link, she just said it, to a bottling video just to teach you how to bottle. So we'll see in a couple minutes when we have this all bottled up. Okay, so we filled our bottles, and I go pretty high up in the neck. They're all pretty much identical, and it was exactly 8 bottles, which is awesome. Usually we end up with like a half bottle. But there's one thing that I would like to do to try to help this carbonate. We've had some issues with natural carbonation before, so I want to give it a little extra insurance.
We had a bad experience.
We've had a few. So we have had natural carbonation work plenty.
Right.
It's just we've had some bad yeast batches because of the heat this year. So it's a kind of a touchy subject around here. So what I have here is more of the yeast that we used for the fermentation of this, so we know it's good. And what I'm going to do is literally just grab a few pinches of that. Just, I mean, it's like 20 grains, 30 grains, you know? And I'm just putting a few grains into every bottle. This way, we're double dog sure, triple dog dare something.
Whoa.
Yeah, I jumped right to triple dog dare.
It's an unprecedented move.
That's right. But this way, we can be more certain that this should carbonate. I know. I still got. I know. I realized I was putting more in as I went along and wanted to get the last two up to the same level.
All right.
The amount of yeast you put in isn't crucial.
This is completely arbitrary.
Yeah. But here's what's going to happen. The amount of yeast you put in doesn't really matter as much, but you want to put in enough that it'll work, okay? And it only has to convert a little bit of sugar.
If you have little yeast sticking on top, just brush them off before you seal them, so that way you make sure that you're getting a good seal.
Yeah. Our hands have been sanitized.
Oh, yes.
We've been siphoning and whatever, so yeah.
We're extra sanitized.
Totally sanitary. I mean, can you ever really be 100% sanitary? No. You just do the best you can. This is Tigger. She's not allowed in here when we're filming.
What are you doing, woman? You got to get out of here. Go. Away. No. Down. Down.
Down.
Take her down. Okay. So now we're all good to go, except for one thing. We have naked bottles. If we put these in the bomb shelter, we won't even know what they are. They'll be a mystery brew. Which means I got to get to labeling.
And what's the bomb shelter?
The bomb shelter is basically just a heavy-duty plastic tote that will fit these bottles inside safely with the lid sealed. The reason why we do this is simply a precautionary measure. So just in case something went awry, perhaps there was a fault in one of our bottles that we were unaware of, and it ruptures, it'll rupture inside that container rather than all over our house.
Yeah, flying glass is not a good thing. So we like to be more careful. But anyway, carbonation can take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. So we're probably just going to let these sit for a little while. We'll be back to show you what we got. Okay, it's been in the bottle for about 2 weeks. It's been in the fridge for about 2 days. But now comes the moment of truth. Did it carbonate? Because that's the question on everybody's mind. I already know. Oh, I'm going to say yes, since there's bubbles coming up the side. We may not get a pour cam on this one. I think I'm just going to pour it.
Well, this isn't a one-year tasting, and we don't do one-year tastings with ciders, so.
Look at that.
It's beautiful.
I'm not even pouring it that hard.
Yeah, he's being gentle.
Because there's going to be some sediment in the bottom of these bottles.
Now, we don't have head retention, but I don't think...
Ciders almost never do.
Right. I think it's the...
It's the proteins in the
protein
beer.
in the beer. I don't know.
Now, part of the reason why there's sediment is anytime you do a natural carbonation, you're going to get some because it is a slight fermentation. Something else of note, had we left this in the fridge longer, it might have done what we call a cold crash, where it could have cleared out. But at the end of the day, to me, cider kind of should be cloudy. Like, it just is one of those things that it feels like it should be.
Right. And there's a particular subset of the cider family called Scrumpy.
That I get different reports on what exactly it is. Some people say it means to scrump, which means to steal the apples from your neighbors to make it. Other people say that it should be cloudy and not carbonated. There's a lot of different definitions. If someone could actually tell me what the real definition of scrumpy is, I bet you I get like 3 different versions too.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm asking, because I'm curious.
Potentially this is Scrumpy adjacent.
Yeah. Still going to call it cider though. For those in the US, it's probably hard cider, but I like to call it cider.
The aroma is delightfully cider-like. It's got the perfect pairing of the sweet tart apple, fresh apple, and alcohol.
But I'm not getting that weird cider funk that we sometimes get. There's no funk.
So yay.
Definitely smells like apple, so time to go in for a taste. Mmm. That's carbonated. Wow, is that carbonated? Oh yeah. Now, this is 9% ABV cider.
Uh-oh.
It's 1.010. We back sweeten this just a little bit.
Yeah.
And then...
if all of our natural carbonation projects can come out this lovely, it's the perfect, like, almost creamy sensation of the carbonation. It's not... I'm not getting that harsh... carbonated water. Sometimes it has that harshness to it. It's just melding perfectly with the apple flavor, giving it that crisp, bright, perfect cider.
Yeah, this is like a semi-dry, but the carbonation is making it a whole different experience. Definitely, effervescence is what you want in a cider.
It's beautiful. I would say easily just as good, and in many cases, in my personal opinion, better than any store-bought cider.
Oh, this is far better than any store-bought cider we've had. It's not as sweet as some of them, but I don't think it needs to be. This one, the apple flavors are actually coming through nicely. And I think that's all the apples that we added to it.
I'm getting a common theme in our grocery store brews. I kind of like them better.
Yeah.
And that leads back to our origins and how we were trying to use easily to find, readily available, simple ingredients to create our brews. And
we've been going back to that a lot, though, recently.
I think there's some merit to that. And it's not just because it's easy and simple, but it tastes good when you're done. So... if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I know someone's going to ask, can I leave out all the fresh apples and just use the juice? You totally can. However, I think it's going to drastically alter the flavor in this particular case. There are not many ingredients here. We basically have cider and apples, and that's it. So if you remove 50% of those ingredients, you might be removing a large percentage of the flavors. The actual apples added tannins, which I'm definitely getting a nice mouthfeel. It's thick and rich in the mouth without being... it's not cloying at all, but it gives a rich, strong mouthfeel, crispness that I don't think would still be there without all those varied apples.
This was our mixed apple, right?
Oh, yeah.
So there's something that we have found as kind of this magic thing when you combine different varieties of apples in a apple-specific thing. Mm-hmm. And we found this out by making our own applesauce.
Applesauce, yep.
We just get a variety of apples, core them, peel them, do the 9 yards, and we don't add much anything else to them. We don't add any sugar.
Right.
We spice it because, Brian's a spice king, but very lightly, not even heavy on the spice.
No,
and it is the best applesauce. My mom always she's like, oh, you're going to make me some more applesauce?
Now, if you can't get a hold of 15 different kinds of apples like we did, My recommendation would be Red Delicious, Fuji, and Granny Smith's. If you can get those 3 or variations of those, that seems to be a good mix because the Fuji gives the sweetness and kind of a softness. The Red Delicious has a lot more acidic bite to it. And then the Granny Smith has that green apple flavor, a little more tart. Those 3 together give the flavor components that you're looking for. You can't get it from just one type of apple. They all taste different.
Yeah.
But if you can get those 3 or something like those, I think you can totally replicate this easily.
Absolutely.
And the apple cider, the juice was just good apple juice.
Yeah, I wish we had one of our just juice ciders to compare this with, but ciders go really quick because they're
this is so much better than the ciders we normally make.
It is. And like all of the problems that we've had in the past with fermenting apple, I'm getting none of those.
Nothing.
And
There's normally an
beverage.
off kind of flavor to it where it tastes young, it tastes a little funk. There's none of that here. This is lovely. I mean, yeah, it's just nice. It's just good cider. There's really, I'm actually really impressed.
I am too. And I'm thinking for Brian's sake and for my sake, because, I just like to push it and make it be Brian's idea, but it's really for me too. We could throw in some spices that you can find in your grocery store.
Yeah, definitely.
In this as well. Now,
we thought about it.
The problem that may occur with that not necessarily will, is that if you're natural carboning a spiced brew, then sometimes the spices get in the way with the fermentation process.
Right.
Not all the time. We haven't seen a consistent, and we don't know exactly where the cutoff point is with this amount of.
This was
spices.
We used 42 grams of sugar to carbonate this, as I recall.
Oh, well then 42 is the answer to the universe.
42 is the answer to the universe. Gave a lovely amount of carbonation. I mean, I'm getting bubbles sticking to the sidewalls, and it's still holding even to the bottom of the glass. That's lovely.
Yeah.
We've had some issues. And here's the thing. I have a couple of theories when it comes to natural carbonation. The first part is you want to get it in the bottle primed as soon as possible. So where normally we say, wait till it goes dry, wait a week, and there's no rush. No. With stuff like that you want to natural carbonate, there is a little bit of a rush. You want to be ready when that bubbles stop. When this thing goes to dead fermentation, you want to check that right away. And if it's at your dry number, get it in the bottles, because the faster you do that, the less likely your yeast are going to go fully dormant. That's my theory. It's holding true.
And we also added a couple of yeast.
We also did
each bottle,
a
right?
pinch of yeast to each bottle. I call that insurance yeast. Did it really make all the difference? I don't know, but it can't hurt. That's my point. It can't hurt to do that. Make sure your yeast is good, because we've had some bad batches of yeast, and that's my story. I'm sticking to it. I'm not even making it up anymore.
Well, we did
bad batches.
We
of
did
yeast.
a test recently, and one of the
them
yeast was dead. We did another one. We did a pre-hydration, and it foamed up.
The foam dome made a foam dome.
It did.
That's right. You'll see that video.
It was impressive. So yeah, the adjustments we did for this particular natural carbonation, I say.
And before anybody freaks out that this is not clear, it is a uniform haze through the whole thing. And that could be pectin from the apples. We did not use pectic acid. We did not use pectic enzyme because, well, last I checked, they don't sell that at my grocery store. Not to be confused with pectin. You do not want to add pectin to this. It'll just make jelly.
Yeah.
Which is good, but not the same thing.
The reason why you're using pectic enzyme is to
break the pectin.
Get the pectin out rather than put pectin in.
Right. However, I'm going to say the cloudiness of this,
I have no problem with it.
None at all.
Zero problem.
This is that kind of good. I don't even care.
And I think part of that pushing the process so that way you can get a good natural carbonation might be a bit of the trade-off, that you're going to perhaps have to sacrifice some of your clarity to make sure you get a good natural carbonation.
Yes and no. I do think if this was to sit in the fridge, maybe even at a little colder temperature, just slightly above freezing, it might actually cold crash in the bottle and you might end up with a clear product. Now, the trade-off there is you're going to have more sediment in the bottom of each bottle.
Yeah.
So there is always that trade-off, okay? Unless you get into forced carbonating, which we're starting to do in other videos, which would be difficult to do with grocery store materials, you're going to have a little bit of sediment in the bottom of the bottles. You saw how I poured it. There's still a little bit left in there. I might let that settle and actually drink some of that because this was that kind of good.
Yeah.
I normally wouldn't. I would normally just go, nope, it's done. It's out of here. this came out wonderful. So
That was lovely.
So we need to give a repeatability score.
I would say repeatability 10.
Yeah, it's a 10 or very, very close to it.
Easy ingredients.
If you
the process
follow
went.
the method that we did, if you let it sit too long, that changes things. If you do it pretty much the way we did, I don't see any reason why you couldn't reproduce this at home.
Yep.
Very, very, very easily done. And that's our repeatability score. That just means like, you know, how easy it is for you to do it. And yeah, no secret tricks, no black magic voodoo or anything like that. It just works.
Easy peasy simple. So yeah, 10. Go team.
Also, I want to point out that this was started on September 19th. Today is October 11th. So this is 3 weeks and we're drinking it carbonated.
And we are happy.
Yeah, this came out awesome.
Speaking of happy, the next number is just how happy are we? This is our personal preference rating, 1 through 10, 1 being it's complete crap, we're going to dump it down the sink and never speak about it again, and 10 being this is the pinnacle of all things this particular beverage style.
Now, I would like to point something out. I am a little tough on apple ciders, okay? They don't always sit well with me flavor-wise, not always a flavor profile that I really like. I've had the Angry Orchards many years ago. There was a few others that I liked that weren't like spectacular, but I liked them well enough along the way. A lot of the ciders that we've made, I liked them. And I just think it's me with cider because I've even had commercial ciders in restaurants and stuff and not been super thrilled. So just keep that in mind when I'm giving my score.
I, on the other hand, enjoy cider quite thoroughly. And lots of times if we're out, I will choose the cider option rather than any other option.
That's fair enough.
All right. Are you ready with a number?
I am ready with a number.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 9.5.
Oh, dang. He went higher than me.
Yeah. The only reason why I didn't go 10 is because it's a cider. It's not my favorite thing in the world. Otherwise, I would totally have gone 10. This came out that kind of good.
I went 9 simply because when I was smelling it and when I was drinking it, it was really making my brain go to the apple pie realm. And so I was missing the spice notes.
Oh, okay. I see.
My brain was saying, oh, there should be spice notes in there, even though there weren't. And so then on tasting it and there weren't any spice notes, I was like, oh, man, I really want some spice notes. Because, you know, my obsession with spiced apple yogurt, this would have gone there.
Yeah, I see where you're getting at. If there was a way to inject spices into it, it might be even better. I might appreciate it more. I probably could even go to 10 on this, except I can't give a 10 to something that has that much haze. I just can't do it because it's not perfect. Okay, It's not the pinnacle. It's not perfect.
That's fair.
But don't get me wrong.
I don't even care.
For a beginner-based cider that came from the grocery store to get a 9 and a 9.5, out of this world. 3 weeks, amazing. It's about what? Maybe 25% as difficult to make as beer? Unless you use all extracts for beer. Like if you do an all grain beer,
Sure.
they're easily 3 to 4 times harder than this to do. I mean, this was just pour a bunch of stuff in. The hardest part was cutting the apples.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the hardest part.
So if you have kids and they're good with knives, maybe that's a bad term.
Yeah, no.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Never mind. So yeah, go to your grocery store and make some grocery store cider.
Yeah. And are we going to save one of these for a year?
No, we don't save it.
Are you sure? Well, we might. We'll see. I don't know. We sometimes do. We sometimes don't.
It's carbonated. We don't save carbonated beverages for a year.
Oh, we don't?
We don't.
Never? Ever? They're always gone in less than a year? Just saying. We don't save them, but sometimes they're still there. If there's one left in a year, we'll do a 1-year tasting on it. See if it changes at all. If there isn't, well, then that's the end of this video. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.
Bye.